And welcome back. Time for Opinion Court. To get in touch with us, 22422 is our SMS line. We begin with the first part of our Opinion Court discussion, focusing on Kenya's withdrawal from South Sudan. My guests in studio, to my right, Ambassador Jimmy Deng Makwach, who's the Deputy Head of the South Sudan Mission in Nairobi. To my left is our foreign policy expert, John Gashie, and across from me in the corner there, Edward Kisiangani, our resident political analyst. Gentlemen, you're all welcome. Ambassador, let me begin with you. Was the announcement by Kenya's president that we shall be withdrawing troops effectively did it come as a surprise to you?
Not really. First of all, I want to say the Republic of South Sudan appreciate the Kenyan contribution in our peace process. We want to thank all the peacekeeping missions in South Sudan that have done their best and the sacrifices that they have done, including General Ondieki, who have just been fired. We want to thank him for his contribution and his service in the Republic of South Sudan. With the decision that has been made by the UN, we are not only surprised, but at the same time shocked with the current process of the peace agreement that we are going through, that there was no formal discussion between the Kenyan government and the UN and the Republic of South Sudan about the changes that need to happen. As such, we are keen to see and to monitor on the way forward on how we proceed with the peacekeeping.
So your surprise is in regards to the actions by the UN Chief Ban Ki-moon to essentially fire Kenya's commander?
Well, exactly, because, you know, as a host country that is hosting the peacekeeping mission in South Sudan, it's always very important that we know who is doing what. And General Ondieki was holding a very important position as far as the peacekeeping mission in South Sudan is very concerned. If there are decisions to be made, at least we expect a formal discussion between Kenya and the UN to take place, and also the host country, which is South Sudan, to be informed that, you know, at least there is a decision that is coming up soon to make changes at the top level of the command.
All right. So has there been any formal protest from your country to the United Nations in the manner in which they expelled Kenya's commander?
We are not, I may not say that we are protesting, but what we want to say is this. The UN and the Kenyan government should get into a formal discussion about what is really transpired to the decision making of why the general was fired and the way forward.
Do you believe the Kenya's exit from South Sudan could portend worse days ahead in terms of a fragile peace process?
Well, there are serious implications when it comes to making changes at the very high senior level when it comes to the command of the UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. With that being said, as I said from the beginning, the Kenyan have really done a very extreme job done in South Sudan to bring peace and security in the region, and to South Sudan in particular. But what I really emphasize would be the government of South Sudan would want to see that Kenya still continue to play a very important role that they have continued to play since the time of the president of Moi, the president Kibaki, and the current president Uhuru Kenyatta.
All right.
And therefore, withdrawal of the Kenyan is also a big concern to the people of South Sudan, because we expect the Kenyans to really play a role in our current situation.
Would you want President Kenyatta to reconsider his decision?
Absolutely, because between us and Kenya we have no problem. I think the UN has to formally engage the Kenyan government on how to resolve this matter.
All right, let me bring in the rest of our panel. John, as our foreign policy expert, was this action by Kenya justified in response to UN Chief Ban Ki-moon's firing summarily of the Kenyan commander, or do you think this perhaps was a bit extreme?
There are two things that come to mind here. Is that the action that was taken by the UN was unilateral. And I think the whole issue of a peacekeeping operation is a kind of an international agreement that brings in altogether different players. And the manner in which it was done, the method was perhaps very perhaps putting it very mildly, was very, a slap in the face on the Kenyan state, the Kenyan people, on the basis that there was not prior consultation. The basic diplomatic etiquette requires that you do not then expose or blame and perhaps even play around with the sovereignty and the dignity of a sovereign state. Kenya is a member of the United Nations, and this is not the only place that Kenya has been actively engaged. We've been engaged in the Balkans, in Iraq, Iran, in Namibia, in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, and we've been almost everywhere. Indeed, we are among the 10 largest peacekeeping contributing countries in the UN peacekeeping operation. And you just don't wake up one day without perhaps due regard and do that and give Kenya a fait accompli.
Okay, so you do think these actions are justified. Prof, do you think, what does it portend for Kenya-UN relations? We work with the UN on a number of issues. We receive significant amounts of aid. You know, we have the AMISOM troops in Somalia. We're receiving aid as part of a UN agreement with EU nations funding Kenyan troops in Somalia. Are there stormy days ahead?
I don't think so. It's being overplayed. If you look at the way the UN system works, the situation that has just unfolded in Sudan is a damning indictment of the UN system. Who calls the shots in the UN? It is the 5 members, permanent members of the Security Council, who do it, and therefore they might have, it's not actually unilateral. These 5 members, the United States, China, might have one of them or several of them were involved in this kind of decision. So you cannot say Ban Ki-moon was just communicating a message from one of the influential permanent members of the Security Council. And Kenya is insignificant in that regard, because it doesn't occupy a permanent seat in the Security Council. So this decision cannot be varied, even if you wanted to do it.
But it's significant in peace and stability in Africa, in the region.
But with regard to South Sudan, I think the biggest question we want to raise is this, that at what point you must look at the reasons that the president gave for withdrawing from Sudan. He talked about a dysfunctional structure and other weaknesses. Now, at what point did the president realize that these systems are dysfunctional, and at what point did he think that there are inherent weaknesses? As a Kenyan, I think that if the president committed our troops in a situation that was dysfunctional, maybe the command is being done elsewhere and our own general is told to take a command, and the inherent weaknesses, he violated our national interest. If the question you are talking about and which you are confronting is that our foreign policy is showing signs of what you call in the international organization an unmeasured foreign policy, disabled and sometimes, incoherent. Because when you ask troops to join a system which is dysfunctional and has inherent weaknesses, you endanger our citizens. So in my opinion, therefore, at what point did the president think maybe the general could not make commands without receiving instruction from another place? So, or maybe the troops were not even equipped well enough to counter these rebels. So who was responsible for supplying enough arms and make sure that the structures of our troops are good enough to repel whoever is attacking the UN place? That's what the president is communicating. Now, he's probably saying that the top members of the UN Security Council should have taken care of that to make sure that the military is equipped enough to deal with the situation. But maybe the military, in its judgment, was not equipped enough. So then, as Kenyans or anybody in Africa, you will ask, why did he commit our troops to go to such a dangerous situation? And therefore, I don't worry about the UN Security Council. Foreign policy is about national interest. What is our national interest? To protect our citizens, including the troops that go out. And if the situation is dangerous, we should not have done. So this is a damning failure on the part of the government to have entered Sudan when it knows that the system is dysfunctional and the structures have inherent weaknesses.
Prof is staying with us, and we'll keep talking on other subject matters, but the rest of my panelists will be leaving. A final comment from you, Ambassador. What would you hope should be the next step forward in order to still safeguard this fragile peace and peacekeeping process, which Kenya's participation has been integral?
Thank you. I want to say, Professor, thank you for your input. However, we are not Sudan, we are South Sudan, and that is a point of clarification that I want to make. But what I want to say is this. I really don't want to say that the government of Kenya is wrong to send the Kenyan troops to South Sudan for the peacekeeping mission, because it's not only in South Sudan. Kenya has been participating in the region to bring peace and security to the rest of the countries. In Somalia, they have done so. Unfortunately, the current situation we are dealing with in South Sudan, as far as UN decision is concerned, I don't think the Kenyan government should not blame itself. The people of Kenya should be grateful for the participation that they have done within the region to bring peace and stability. With that being said, we want to thank the people of Kenya and the government of Kenya for what they have done in the process of the peace in South Sudan during the early days of our struggle with Sudan until we get our independence. Until today, Kenya continue to play a very vital role. Therefore, I don't want it to be a disappointment to the Kenyan people that the pulling out of the Kenyan peacekeeping mission is an end to the Kenyan participation in our politics or our cause to be a country. But what I want to say is this. As a government, we will continue to engage the Kenyan government regardless of the current situation and a decision that has been made by the UN.
Okay.
But don't you agree, Ambassador, that Kenya is neighboring South Sudan and there are partisan interests? Kenya is not the correct country unless its national security is threatened and national interest. It should never take troops to South Sudan. Even when you look at how people operate in Nairobi, there is a conflict. Some people think that the Kenya government associates with one faction against the other. There are people who think like that in South Sudan. Our own citizens have been threatened in South Sudan. So Kenya can... In Somalia, it is a different case because our national security was threatened. But in Sudan, we have no business taking our troops there.
I would say, just for a clarification here, I think the issue is not that Kenya did wrong to have contributed. Kenya was asked, like any other member of the United Nations, to provide troops because Kenya had an experience, Kenya had an expertise to do that. Now the bigger thing right now, Prof, as I say here, is that somebody is trying to pass the ball and pass the blame. The blame is not the Kenyan commander. The blame is not the Kenyan troops. The blame is that the UN, the international community, has yet to agree on the best way forward and how to deal with the problem in South Sudan.
That is why we should have waited for that to happen before we take our troops.
Fair enough. I want to end this discussion here. Certainly the next few days will be informative. We wish peace for your people. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. We're staying with Professor Edward Kisegani. We'll talk more after the break. Stay with us.
Thank you.